This week on Dig Me Out. With your hosts, Jason Zia and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at Dig Me. I'm not going to spell the whole URL at DIGMEOUTPODCAST.
Wow, good job.
.com. Join the Dig Me Out Union to vote on albums. Pick one to discuss with us on the show, get access to bonus episodes, and join our private Discord community. Maybe I can turn that into a jingle. DIGMEOUTPOD.
It sounded better than I thought it would.
It kind of has a nice flow to it. I never really thought about that.
I think we need a new theme song.
Dun 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 dun. Yeah, something like that. We need like band with like trumpets and trombones and stuff like that. Luckily, I have my saxophone right here, so I'll get on that. We have with us, speaking of our union, a union member returning. We can always count on him to bring us the rock in different forms over the years. Last year, it was hookers. There have been so many. Groovy Ghoulies, Course of Empire. I can't list them all. There's so many. But let's welcome back to the program, Eric Peterson. Eric, how are you?
Doing fine. Thank you.
Will you please share with our audience your pick for this year?
From the Oi punk band Cock Sparrer, their album Two Monkeys.
Which has three monkeys
on the cover.
I just realized that. Oh.
Yeah. So what the hell is going on there? Why is it named Two Monkeys when there are three? Is that a joke? Are they trolling us? I don't know.
I think it's likely they have that kind of sense of humor, for sure.
Well, obviously, I mean, naming the band Cock Sparrer, which is, I guess, a Cockney term of familiarity, but
yes,
sounds dirty
to Americans.
I'm trying to imagine using it in a sentence. It's I don't know. I don't know how you would. I don't know how you finagle that into your daily.
I imagine there's a couple pints involved at the pub. And it should be mentioned that these guys formed in 1972 in London, which is the prime time era of what became known as the pub rock movement, which is what happened right before punk.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the most famous people to come out of the pub rock era are Nick Lowe, who was in the band Brinkley Schwartz, Elvis Costello, and then Joe Strummer, who was in the band The 101ers.
Before the Clash. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, Jay, but I had not listened to a note of Cock Sparrer before we did this episode. Had you?
Yeah, I had. Yeah, I like the album Shock Troops. I think I came to it through, I don't know, probably going down some rabbit hole on either Rose Tattoo or Lucifer or some band in their late 90s, early 2000s. And that album came up as a recommendation. And yeah, I've been a fan of it. But I didn't really get into the rest of the catalog. I don't even know that I knew they had other albums. I just always read them as like, oh, this is a band, like a one album band or something.
Interesting. I'd heard the name, but I had never heard them.
If I can just say that in my mind, Shock Troops might be the best UK punk album of the 1980s, in my opinion. Nice. I think that highly of it. It's really an amazing album, and it's too bad that it didn't catch on at the time. But one of the things we might talk about is this band has a massive fan base around the world at this point in time.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy. You said they formed in 72. A lot of the original members are still in the band. They have had some changeover, but a lot of that happened very early in the history of the band because they were together in the 70s and like couldn't sell a record essentially, and they broke up. And then people discovered them from like their 7 inches that they had released. And then they're like, I guess we should get back together. And it went, you're still in like, the late 70s, early 80s when this is happening. So it's punk bands are still just popping up.
Mhm.
So some of the history here, they're from the East End of London, which I don't know what that means in terms of territory of London, like if has a particular vibe or style, I don't know. They, as mentioned, formed in 72. The original lineup was Colin McFall, Mick Beaufoy, Steve Burgess, and Steve Bruce. They had all been friends since the age of 11. And so they grew up together and then they formed this band. And then Gary Lamon, who was Burgess' cousin, joined on as second guitar. And that's when they met Malcolm McLaren, who was managing the Sex Pistols, but I guess that didn't work out. So the band ended up signing a deal with Decca Records, and their first single did not sell well. Then they did a cover for the second single, and they got dropped. So they had already had an album's worth of material recorded at that point, but they couldn't get it released in the UK. So it was only released in Spain. And it didn't come. So that was released in 1978 in Spain, but it wasn't actually released in the UK until 1987, which is that's wild. That's a crazy thing to happen. So how they got rediscovered, and do you know this story, Eric?
If you're talking in the 90s, because I know that.
Well, the early 80s after they had originally broken up.
Yeah, not really. I know that they were an inspiration for the Oi movement or street punk movement, which is the British version of second wave punk, along with bands like Sham 69, the Cockney Rejects. I believe that their single "Running Riot" was a big part of the football hooligan scene, and that's kind of what led to them getting another chance in the early 80s.
Yeah, so those Oi compilations that were coming out in like 81, they had Cock Sparrer songs, and people were hearing them going, oh, this band's really cool. And the band was like, well, we're broken up. And then they got back together, but they replaced Gary Lamon on second guitar with Chris Skepsis at that point. And they signed to Career Records, and they released a single called England Belongs to Me. That did pretty well, and then they released their debut album Shock Troops in 1983. That's the one you were talking about earlier, Jay. It's at that point that Mickey Beaufoy leaves the band and is replaced by Shug O'Neill, and that's the final lineup change. Is it like in 1983? So they've been together. Well, they only were together for a couple years in the 80s, and then they got back together in 1992, which was what you were mentioning earlier, and then they've been together ever since. So you've had the same lineup since like 82, which is pretty amazing that everybody's still alive and in a band together. So what was the deal with the 90s reunion? Because they broke up again in 84.
Yeah. So I believe they had an album in 92, I want to say. And then what happened was a couple of things. One is that bands like Rancid started singing their praises.
Okay.
Because a lot of Oi compilations started getting released in the States, or because of the internet, you were able to order those when previously you wouldn't have been able to, either through mail order in the States or actually eventually going online was joking with my brother earlier about, yeah, you go on CD now and order Shock Troops or whatever. And then additionally, when things like Best Buy started coming around, but also Tower Records, and they started carrying these really deep catalogs of music that people could then go to their Tower Records and buy, these Oi compilations. I was asking my brother, do you remember how we discovered Cock Sparrer? And he said, well, I was listening to Rancid and they mentioned this band, The Last Resort. So I went looking for The Last Resort and I found them in Oi compilations. And then I heard, Cock Sparrer on the compilations. And I asked our friend Tony, hey, do you know this band? He's like, yeah, I'll make you a tape. And it kind of went from there that, we started digging into a lot of Oi stuff. And I think a lot of people did, because you see a resurgence of Oi/street punk here in the US. There is a wave of that going on, at that mid to late 90s time. There's a whole scene that people don't know about with all kinds of crazy bands that were playing in the Oi sound. And do you remember Hellcat Records?
Remember the name? Yeah.
I think it was Lars from Rancid. It was
Lars
his
Fredrickson,
label.
yeah.
Yeah, his label. I believe he had a lot of street punk and Oi bands on that label.
So
you could get those like $5 samplers and hear, I don't know, some Oi band from Texas or Washington State or whatever. So it all came back because people could A, find it, B, the internet gave you the opportunity to learn about it, and C, it was just available for, across the board.
Right.
I think Cock Sparrer just rose to the top of that because of the quality of their earlier work.
The only other band that I've listened to in the Oi genre is Sham 69. There's a single called The Kids Are United,
Yep.
I think. And I play that in the car sometimes, hoping that Nina will like it, but she doesn't caught on to that. I'm like, come on, this is about you and the kids fighting against the evil oppressors of adulthood. You need to get the anthem going with your fellow classmates. And she couldn't care less.
Cock Sparrer actually references that song on I think it's the opening track of Shock Troops.
Oh, really? That's cool. So the album we're talking about came out in 97. So actually their second reunion. This was released on Bitscore originally, and initially only available in Germany. And then it got reissued, I guess, in 2009. And that was remixed. And I know there was a discussion on the Discord this week about the original version versus the remix version. I listened to MP3s that there were on some punk blog, because I typed in Cock Sparrer, Two Monkeys, and then this blog came up. And I was like, oh, they've got MP3s, but I don't know if it was the original version or the remastered version. I think it's the original version. We'll talk about why. But Jay, do you know what version you listened to?
It just says remastered. It was released in 2009 on Captain Oi Records.
Yep. Okay, so that's the newer one.
And it wasn't in their discography for some reason. I had to search for the title specifically, and then it showed up. But if you just went to the Cock Sparrer page on Apple Music, it wasn't there.
Huh. Interesting. And since Two Monkeys, they've released Here We Stand on Captain Oi Records in 2007. Then there was a 10-year break, and they released Forever on Chase the Ace Records in 2014. And then last year, they released the album Hand on Heart on Cherry Red, and it was the first time they made it onto the UK album chart. They made it number 96 last year. So congratulations to a bunch of 60-year-old punks for getting on the UK album chart. That's pretty awesome. That did not expect that to happen in 2024. And they have a number of compilations and live albums and 7-inch singles. So if you're into the sounds of Cock Sparrer after this episode, you'll have a lot to dig into. We had some comments. We had a few comments over at our Patreon page. We'll get to the final vote totals later. Someone deleted a comment. I don't know. Or did
Yes, I know what that was. Somebody commented, "Oh, 90s band names," and I simply said, "They formed in 1972."
Okay.
And they deleted the comment, which I wasn't trying to be a jerk. I was just trying to point out they're actually much older than that.
Sure.
Is this the oldest band that you guys have had on the show?
Oh, that's a good question.
And by
I
oldest,
mean,
I mean the longest time.
I mean,
since
we
the band
did
formed.
What
Aerosmith.
year did they start?
72.
So we've
Oh,
done
yeah.
an
I was gonna say
Aerosmith
maybe Red
episode
Cross, but they were like 78 or 80 or something.
when he kissed form.
Like 74,
Oh.
maybe. I don't know. When did they start
73,
ripping off Alice
72.
Cooper?
Huh?
It was
What'd
like
you say?
73, 72 when Kiss started.
Oh, Aerosmith formed before this. They formed in 70.
Okay.
So I mean, those guys might be like the same age or a little older. I don't know when they started in their, their lives, how old they were. But I'm guessing, well, we've also done a Neil Young episode. We did Neil Young in the 90s. So he's like 100 years old.
He started what, 60, 63, 64, something like that.
I don't even know in Canada when he was in bands in Canada before he even came to the States. So
yeah, he's on the Nuggets box set.
Right. So Keith Miller said, I knew Cock Sparrer. No, I'm sorry. I couldn't find the original mix, but as it is, this is an easy, worthy album for me. Punk rock with a super talented lead guitar player and some classic rock influences. Sign me up. The singer sounds a lot like Johnny Rotten and even uses some phrasing and phrases that remind me of him. But so many punk rock singers sound the same. It's not really a detriment. Gavin said, I knew Cock Sparrer, but I had only heard, I guess, one album when I played last year's. That doesn't make, I don't, what? There's a word missing there. And this falls into a similar area of music. I only need 5 to 6 songs in any given listen. Very happy they get a review though. A bit more oi never hurts. Which I never really knew what oi meant. I was like, what is oi meant? So basically it's like saying hey. It's like British slang for hey. Because there was a guy in one of the bands that got labeled an oi band. He would be like, oi, this next song's called. So he's basically saying, hey, this next song's called. So that's where oi comes from. You learn something new. I love that I get educated, about things tangential to this podcast as when we do this. And then Darren Leach said, never heard of this band prior, but love the energy of this album. The inner teenager laughed at their name. Ha. Well, I think this band would be better experienced in a small, sweaty club. They're somewhat able to transfer that energy on album. The Spotify album has 4 bonus live tracks, and you can tell being on stage is their natural habitat. The singer especially gets the crowd going. Checking live dates. Looks like they're still touring and they're playing London in a couple months. I might go. Worthy album, as you get what's written on the packaging. You get 3 monkeys. Only you promise 2 and you get 3. So that's over delivering, which I appreciate. Let's get into the record, Jay. I'm going to do it differently this week. I'm going to go to you, Jay, and then you throw it to Eric. Because every time we go to guess the third person, they're like, you took all my points. So let's see what happens. Let's just do an experiment here. Throw to Eric, and then I'll go last. I'll sum up. Right. Let's go.
I thought we were taking a little pressure off folks too, but okay.
But Eric's a pro. He's been here like 40 times.
I'm good if Eric wants to go first.
Please, I would actually like to hear what at least one of you has to say. That way I can actually respond and add to.
Gotcha. To me, this record it's like hanging out with a gang, sitting at a local bar, rowdy dudes having fun. The music's rooted in working class genres, so a little punk, a little hard rock. You listen to what's going on drum wise, it's super straightforward. You got 4/4 beats that are somewhere between punk speed and AC/DC. That's about the variety you get drum wise. I do like the vocals a lot. Now I'm familiar with the band from the '83 album. And it's close vocally. It's the same type of approach. It's produced a little different, but it's kind of the spoken delivery where you get a really heavy accent, which gives you that attitude. It's got a little snarl to it, but it can be melodic. I mean, there are some. It's not all just barking. You know, there are some choruses here and some cool melody lines that they're able to deliver. And then I think the crucial piece that maybe gives it the oi spirit and to me creates this sense of like hanging out with people is the gang vocals, you know, that drop in these choruses or drop it in verses to just add this sense of community, like, you know, all in this together and shouting together. I like the songs, you know, also are surprisingly diverse on here. You know, you get in the record and it feels like pretty straightforward, like punk, but then all of a sudden the record starts to develop a bit and you get some anthems and you start to hear like these harmonizing guitars and, you know, lyrics that are a bit more not nostalgic but sentimental, with songs like East End Girl and I Live in Marbella and Battersea Bardot and Back Home. Almost nostalgic vibe to them too. The tempos come down. The songwriting feels a little more sophisticated. Those songs reminded me of the Vapors a little bit, or that type of sound. You know, it's still rock, but it's got a little bit of new edge or like different flavor to it, or new wave flavor to it. When they bring those tempos down and they kind of explore, you know, one song had some keyboards on it, you know. It gets more diverse than I would have expected hearing the 83 album and, you know, listening to the first 2 or 3 tracks here. So yeah, I mean, it lures you in with what feels like, fairly predictable. This is going to be a fairly straightforward rock record, you know, punk energy. And then it takes some turns with some surprises and experiments that, you know, at times were pretty fun and made it, you know, a bit of a journey, more of a journey than I expected. So that's what worked for me. How about you, Eric?
So to follow along with you, yeah, I really like the diversity. You know, you could hear, obviously you talked about the punk, but I definitely listening to this a lot recently heard some like boogie kind of rock, definitely heard some more classic rock sounds. But I think overall, what really works for me is the energy of this. Even though the tempos change and you get kind of almost a ballad with Battersea Bardot, that never loses the drive and the tempo, and it's just like one song into the next. You know, it never drags. And I completely agree that this feels like hanging out with a bunch of people, having a good time. You know, just that kind of, you know, being in a bar. And, you know, the band on stage is just hitting it perfectly. How about you, Tim?
Well, I really love this record. I love the oi gang vocal thing when it happens. And I also appreciate, this is going to sound weird, but I appreciate the sort of soccer hooligan vibe that some of these songs like bats out. Like, yeah, okay, let's go get our bats, boys. Like, we're clearly going to a gang fight. Like, what is going on here? Okay. Or AU, someone's going to get stomped tonight or something like that. Like, it's like living vicariously through a bunch of, you know, Guy Ritchie characters.
Hey, you look like a fool. How I do I shut it Tell me what you gonna do about it, you and me outside. You're a bloke who's heading for one, a real fist magnet if ever I saw one. You and me outside. I saw you kiss that girl over in the corner. It's not jealousy, it's just you and me. Someone's gonna get slapped tonight. Someone's gonna get whacked tonight. Someone's gonna get a smack tonight from me. And it's gonna be you.
I really love the energy. I think that they do a good job of mixing up the tempos, which I was not expecting on a punk record. And I think it's because they're a little bit older. So they're able to embrace, like, Battersea Bardot almost sounds like the Pogues to me in some respects. And I think that that's something that guys who have played punk for a long time can mess around with different tempos. Like they can slow it down and do sort of, you know, like I Live in Marbella is, I mean, it has like a Spanish guitar intro and outro. I mean, it's not what you would expect from, you know, most punk bands to be doing, but they're not 19. You know, these guys are in their, I'm guessing they're in their like 40s by now, by the time they're making this record, because they started in 72, right? So that means they had to have been like in their teens at that point, and this is 20 years later. So I mean, late 30s maybe when they make this record. So it's not you don't have the energy, I think, to do like 13 blazing fast punk rock songs, and you probably don't have the interest in doing that anymore. And I think that that's why I responded to this, because it's all over the place in the best way possible of changing up the tempos, keeping you interested, changing. You know, I actually broke out my guitar and just played along trying to figure out the songs, and a lot of them are real simple, but they do a good job of like just finding interesting leads. Bats Out has like basically a Chuck Berry lead on it, like very Chuck Berry-ish from early rock and roll sound. You know, that's something I don't think a 19-year-old would do, is like reference Chuck Berry. I think that that's someone who's got a little bit more experience and has listened to more records is probably going to like throw in a reference like that. So I from that aspect of like hearing an older group of musicians make a punk rock record and a British, you know, a Oi record, like it was pretty interesting. Production wise, I don't know if you guys had the same, I don't know if we all listen to the same version, but it seemed like there was a lot of jumping around in production quality. Like one song would sound full, and then I get one song and it would sound like just not the same quality as some of the other tracks. Did you guys experience that at all?
Not really. And I'm looking at the liner notes here. It looks like they were all recorded at the same studio. Or wait a minute. It looks like there were actually a couple studios, but it looks like they had one producer and maybe two different engineers. So that maybe not the you might be picking up on something there.
Okay, because like when you go from Anthem to Time to Be Me,
mm-hmm.
the sound of the snare changes drastically.
Okay.
To me, on what I'm listening to, it like turns into a tin can on Time to Be Me, whereas it's much fuller on Anthem.
Tell
So that was just something it was like such a big jump because those two songs are also quite different. So to hear like a production change as well as like a
yeah, I think I know what you're talking about, Tim. Now they do. I think it's I Feel Death Coming On does the same thing. They do a weird compression on those songs. It's almost to make it sound like crunchy and smaller,
right,
tighter, and then the vocals like really on top.
Because the kick, or I mean the snare just sounds like,
yeah,
it almost sounds like a cymbal.
Yeah,
it's so unbassy or trebly.
Mm-hmm. I think that felt to me like a production decision. Like, hey, we want these songs to sound different.
Maybe. I mean, maybe that
I'm not saying it was the right one, but it sounds like on purpose versus just a mistake.
Like those two songs sound more like what I would expect a early 1980s recording to sound like.
Yeah.
So maybe that was the reason. Maybe because those songs sound like that.
Yeah.
Maybe they produce them that way so that they sound in a similar vein to that original sound.
Yeah.
So whoops, I just pushed the down button on my desk somehow while we were standing here.
I almost lost you.
I almost went out of the screen. So that's all the stuff that worked for me. Jay, is there anything that didn't work for you?
Yeah, I struggled a little bit with the songwriting and I guess the presentation a bit. It's weird in that it is both too safe at times and also goes too far at times. When it hits the right in the middle, it works, and then it either gets too predictable or they try and experiment and something doesn't quite work out. So AU, Tart, Time to Be Me, I think those are good examples of just being too safe. Like I want a little something extra in those songs, particularly in the verses. And then Battersea Bardot, I like where they're going with it, but there's a guitar in that song that is awful. That it's like the lead guitar that continues to drop in through the song that doesn't fit the rest of the tone of the song.
Shooting star, from the stage to the squeeze, from TV to striptease, I loved you in the back of my car. Nobody's gonna tell you what to do, nobody's gonna mess around with you. You'll never give up the fight, North Carolina. Kathy, come on.
It's heavily distorted and clearly overdubbed, and it just keeps coming in throughout the song, and it's just what is that? Get that out of here. I Feel Death Coming On, the same thing. The chorus is a bit of a letdown, even though it's trying a little bit of a different sound. Goodbye. There's just something about it that doesn't quite lock together. It just sounds too busy or something. Like the bass is kind of busy and the vocal doesn't quite lock up with what the bass is doing. It sounds a little like they're trying different things, which I appreciate, but there's just moments where that experimentation I think works really well. And then there's other times where not so much. Back Home is a good example where the solo on that has this trippy synth sound. It might even be a synth, but it kind of weird and it works, and I'm cool with that. It feels like maybe an ode to 70s glam rock in some ways, which I liked. It's got a cool walking bass line. So that's a good example of like, I think a song that works that's a little different than what you hear when the album first starts off. I like aspects of what Battersea Bardot is doing. I just, some production choices in there are weird. So it's just that. It's just, there's times where it's just too safe, or it's too, I don't want to say too experimental. It's like they're experimenting, but like the pieces that are not quite fitting together correctly for me. So anything that worked for you, Eric?
There's some production stuff that sounds a little bit thin, and I do recognize that, you know, there's a band that's recording an album on for an indie label that doesn't have, you know, maybe the resources to, you know, spend weeks in the studio or whatever. But so there's some production stuff, and there's a couple of songs that are really forgettable. I mean, they're not necessarily bad, but they don't really hook me, and I don't really think about them when I'm thinking about this album. But you know, those are like, in my opinion, minor quibbles. So that's really it when I'm thinking about what doesn't work. You know, maybe they could have left one or two of them off and had a little bit tighter of a record. How about you, Tim?
Well, I agree. There's production choices that I disagree with. And I think, you know, you mentioned, Jay, there's like a fuller sound to Back Home. And when you compare that to like Tart sounds like empty in comparison. It needed something happening. And then you mentioned about the bass in Goodbye. That stuck out to me like a sore thumb. First of all, it's mixed really high, and you hear that bass line, and I don't feel like it matches what's going on with the song.
Mm-hmm.
There's something off about it.
Get a job, be a fool or a yop, and prepare yourself for jail. But we're tired of the constant surrender to those with the hidden agenda. So we fought with the best. Now it's time for a rest as we say our last farewell. Goodbye, we're calling it a day. We're having it away. We're gonna say goodbye, goodbye. There's nothing left to say. We're getting in the way. We're gonna say goodbye for the holidays in Devon, for the spirit of 77, for the laughs and the licks and the drinks and the gigs and the making of the fuss, for the friends who knew just where to find us, for the mates who were always behind us.
And I noticed a couple times there's just like a few points in the record where the bass just gets insanely loud compared to the rest of the instruments. And I was like, what? So I think the mix is just off, which is making, I don't know how much, I know they remastered, but I don't know if they remixed anything. I feel like this would just benefit from a remix is all. Get Ed Stasium on the phone, or one of those replacements guys who did the remixes, because was it Matt Wallace did Don't Tell a Soul? I feel like there's like a fantastic sounding record in here. It just needs to be remixed to get there. But you know, there's Tart is not the best lyrical song on the record. It's kind of angry, and
It's very 90s.
yeah. So that one's not my favorite. In fact, if I was going to drop something, I'd probably drop like that song.
And that verse riff is not good.
No, it's
like
just
the na. Like, no, I don't ever want to hear that again.
Yeah, there's some cliched stuff happening, but when they do it well, like I think musically, like Bats Out is a song that musically works. It's basically playing 50s rock and roll. It's just it's a very simple progression, but it sounds cool. It sounds good. They have the right lead guitar sound. Everything works well together.
That honky tonk piano makes a huge difference too.
Yeah.
Like
That's the one that I thought gave me kind of that boogie rock kind of feel.
Yes.
Like 70s boogie rock.
Right. And I think, Jay, when you mentioned it, like on Back Home, there is like touches of like T-Rex or Slade or something to some of this, like that glam rock 70s British glam rock sound.
mm-hmm.
Which is
they would have
again,
been around for. They would have been playing around that. So in addition to pub rock, the other thing that was going on at the time in the UK was that glam stuff, and there's a whole world of bands that had one or two great singles that didn't get discovered, that were just playing around, that they would have seen in the local pubs.
Right. And I guess I didn't think about the time frame, like, oh yeah, those guys would have been seeing those bands, and not realizing that they would, because I always considered oi in my mind was the Skinhead sound, and I always associated that with just like really fast, like almost like hardcore, like fat, but it's actually not. I had misconceptions about what oi actually is. So it was good to get corrected by this record. But this did come out in 97, only in Germany. So there's no possibility of like a college radio in the US getting this. It would have to be an import. And I don't think college radio stations were not getting serviced by a tiny label in Germany. That just was not going to happen. So like this basically, I don't think it would have ever had any impact in the US until the reissue maybe. And then maybe that got sent out.
I would say that at least, where I went to school, which was a very big, Michigan State was a very big campus and a very big radio station at the time. We did have a punk specialty show where, like a Thursday night all out attack or whatever they called it, where if the hosts were into this kind of stuff, they would have, sought it out. But no, I don't think like randomly a station manager is going to get this unless they get one of those oi compilations sent to them.
Sure.
So maybe not this record, but there might have been, like Bitscore or whatever might have had one of those radio samplers that they would have sent out.
That's true. Yeah, I guess that probably would have been the only way, because yeah, I'm just thinking of the boxes of CDs we would get in from like, Universal and Epic. There'd just be like this sleeve of, and you're like, oh, here's 20 new albums that came out just from Epic Records this week. And then you get the same thing from, 10 other majors at the time or whatever it was, and and then Merge and Matador and all those people. And I'm like, poor Bitscore, they're not going to be able to crack that in 97. So overall ratings on this record. We'll share the poll results in a moment, but Jay, where do you land? Worthy album, better EP, or decent single?
I'm landing at an EP. I like Before the Flame Dies, Lies, East End Girl, Anthem, I Live in Marbella, Bats Out, and Back Home. And it's a nice mix of, to me, the material that's working the best. There's a decent amount of range on there. It has that. You can see the maturity in the band, which I think is cool with that selection, but it still has that energy that a band like this has to have. Where you at, Eric?
Worthy album. I mean, there are some minor quibbles. Any songs that I don't really dig, they're over soon enough. I mean, I've listened to this album on and off for years, and I always come back to it eventually. Than their catalog. I will say, in my opinion, they've never put out a bad album. There's always worthy songs on the album. Sometimes there's a dud or two involved, but I mean, they're fairly consistent. So worthy album. I also just want to point out that I Live in Marabella is actually called I Live in Marabella Working Part 3. There is a working part 1 that is on Shock Troops, and there is a working part 2. I don't remember which of the later albums it's on. But it's a trilogy of songs about, the first one's about people who are on the dole but are working under the table, and the second one is about people who do HVAC work and how they deal with the bored housewives. Let's just put it that way. And then this one is about a guy who was involved in a bank robbery and he got away, and now he lives in Marabella with his ill-gotten gains. And so it's this kind of trilogy of songs about people getting away with stuff while working, and kind of some of the blue collar experience or dreams of escaping the blue collar experience. So
got it. Interesting. Well, I'm going to say Worthy Album. I would trim 3 songs. I would cut Tart. I would cut I Feel a Death Coming On, and I would cut Goodbye. And that get me to 10 songs. I think that's a nice tight 10 tracks that would go by real fast. I mean, from that, there's only one song, I think, over 5 minutes. That's Anthem, and then one song over 4 minutes. So everything else is, 2 or 3 minutes, which is perfect. So that's 2 Worthy Albums and 1 EP, which kind of shakes out to how our poll came out. Worthy Album 50%, Better EP 25%, and Decent Single 25%.
Can we guess who the decent single was?
I can give you 2 guesses.
There weren't enough mechanical sounds. There weren't enough people banging on pipes.
Oh, okay. Let's not start a war here.
I'm not. I tease.
I honestly, I would have expected Ian if he did. I don't know. He didn't make a comment, so he might not have actually heard it. But that would be the odd. If we were in Vegas, that's where my money's going. Maybe we should start our own like DraftKings for these episodes, Jay, where we like make bets about people can lay bets about how we're going to vote on the records, and
gotta get this shit up on Polymarket.
Yeah, how do we monetize our opinion?
We got a minute coin.
Do we have a meme coin yet?
I mean, we should. It's the only way you make money now.
Yeah, that's true.
Selling bullshit.
Yes, selling garbage. I saw somebody,
but the idea of betting on these is pretty funny.
And then we could be corrupted, and there would be a whole scandal.
See, that's where
I love it.
GMO gate.
Eric slips us a 50 under the table, so we both go Worthy Album.
Right. Normally, I would say that's the problem where this idea wouldn't work, but maybe it will.
And then, but we set the odds in our favor.
The world we live in now, maybe that's exactly what we should be doing.
I don't know why we're playing by the rules.
I don't know.
There are no rules.
Honestly, I think we're suckers that we are adhering to any sort of civil society or rule-based society. At this point, I'm ready to just,
yeah.
I've already purchased all of the football gear I'm going to need for my post-apocalyptic wasteland suit. I've got a nice hockey helmet coming in with some spikes that I'm going to drill onto it, and I'm going to have a makeshift flamethrower. So that's going to be my character in the post-apocalyptic wasteland. Football flamethrower. Flame Ball. That's my name. It'll be my name. Where's Flame Ball? All right,
that's
sorry about that. That's my name.
Flame
the
ball?
guy with the football helmet that has a flamethrower.
Oh, I thought you meant ball, as in you only had one.
No, like a uni.
This has gone in a weird direction.
Sorry. This is what happens when we have a band called Cock Sparrer.
Yeah,
makes me think of all possible alliterations of that and post them on Discord.
Thought we were hanging out in the bar with a bunch of dudes. What happened?
Yeah. Sorry. Well, Eric, thank you for bringing this to us. You always bring us very interesting records for us to check out.
I do my best.
We are usually pretty impressed. I don't know that we've ever given you. Have we ever given you a decent single?
Twice.
Oh. Well, at least now the markets will know when they start betting that we don't play favorites.
It's feast or famine. I've accepted that. I have weird tastes. Either it's going to be like, oh, this is cool, we like Phantom Blue, or it's going to be like, yeah, we don't like that Four Non Blondes thing. So,
Four Non Blondes. Yeah. Okay. Yep, that makes sense. Okay.
That's all right though.
Well, we thank you for coming back every year and hanging out with us for an hour to talk about records. We always enjoy it. I want to remind the folks out there listening that if you're not yet a paid subscriber, you can be. Getting a subscription gives you access to bonus podcast episodes covering 70s, 80s, and aughts rock, new release reviews, and access to our private Discord community. Hopefully this episode brought back some good memories. You can join us at digmeoutpodcast.com to explore our 800 episode archive, history of the band posts, and more. And while you're there, suggest an album that you think deserves to be featured on a future episode of Dig Me Out. We currently have a poll going, and it should have wrapped up by the time this episode airs. So we will have another poll episode coming up very soon, which you can suggest at digmeoutpodcast.com. So for Jay, I'm Tim. We're out, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.